presentation will be to kind of navigate through what conformity assessment is in Mexico and what things you need to know and what you need to do in order to comply and get into the market. So my two objectives today is going to be, first of all, is to understand conformity assessment, and second of all, understand how plumbing product compliance is done in Mexico. Like Shirley said, for Indonesia, there is no plumbing code in Mexico. So the way things are regulated in Mexico is actually by the use of standards. These are called NOM standards, Official Mexican Standards. It is a big gray cloud of what NOM standard is. So hopefully this is what I'm going to try to explain today, and how that gets created, how that happens, who regulates it, who enforces it, and ultimately what's going to happen if we don't comply with it. So that's my goal. Hopefully we can get this point across. We really can't understand how conformity assessment is done in Mexico unless you understand how the structure of the national standardization program is. This is heavily involved with the government. Mexico regulates everybody, and everybody checks on everybody's work. Nobody trusts anybody, so the system is set up so that everybody is going to be checking what the previous person did. So because of this, that's a complication. We have to understand how the government system works in Mexico. So my first slide is actually on the structure of the certification program in Mexico. As you can see from my slide here, you can see that it all starts from the top, and this is the Ministry of Economy. All of this are the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Energy, and the Ministry of Environmental and Natural Resources are government entities. The Ministry of Economy is the one that ultimately approves any standard, any NOM standard, Mexican standard or NOM standards, and I'll get to that, what exactly that means between the two standards. And also is the one that's going to publish the standard at the end of the process. As part of the Ministry of Economy, there is an entity called DGN. In Spanish, it's actually Dirección General de Normas, which roughly translated in English is the Board of Standards, National Standards. This entity is in charge of regulating and controlling everything regarding national standardization program. They assign conformity assessment responsibilities, and they also assign the only accreditation entity in Mexico to do the work. This entity is actually the Entidad Mexicana de Acreditación, which for short is EMA. They are the only accreditation body in Mexico. They are in charge of accrediting all the test labs, all the certification labs, and all the inspection bodies in the country. Okay, so I said all of this, and I threw a lot of jargon to you right now, but you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, well, how are standards created? Is it the DGN that's making the standards? Is it the certification bodies? What's going on here? The answer is no, none of the above. Actually, the standards are made by the National Standardization Advisory Committees. These are committees that are part of the commissions that are representing, not representing, but they are in charge of enforcing the. Are you having fun there, Russ? Yeah. That's fine. I'll let it pass. I'll let it pass. Yeah, no problem. So I was saying these National Standardization Advisory Committees are part of the committees of the organizations that are in charge of enforcing compliance for their sector. So depending on what type of product is who that entity will belong to. So for example, if you're working with water, you're going to be working with the Ministry of Environmental Resources. That's CONAGUA. That's the entity in charge of that. If you're dealing with electrical products, you're going to be dealing with the Ministry of Energy, which is given the responsibility to CONUE, which is the Commission of Safe, Efficient Energy Use. Hard to translate sometimes. And if you're dealing with water filters and products of that nature, you have to be dealing directly with the Ministry of Health. And their equivalent entity is the COFEPRIS. Okay, so I went very fast in talking about the DGN, and I would like to spend a little bit more time on them because they are really the key aspect of the whole structure. The DGN, like I said before, coordinates the national standardization, metrology, and conformity assessment system of the country. And this is done by means of two documents. One of them is the Federal Law of Metrology and Standardization, and the second is the regulation of the Federal Law of Metrology and Standardization. These two documents cover everything. And as far as that is concerned, the DGN will actually formulate, review, issue, modify, cancel, and distribute the official Mexican standards. They will also establish and organize and preside over the national standardization committees. They will also coordinate and register the national standardization bodies that they issue the standards. So lastly, and you can't see on this slide, the format is a little bit bad, but there is one last point right here, and it's the key point. The point is the DGN also is in charge of stating who and what traceability all the instruments are going to have. So because the Federal Law of Metrology and the regulation of the Federal Law of Metrology are documents that were made in 1984, if I remember correctly, the idea and the concept of using standardized international standards is not really implemented in the system yet. So for that reason, the current method of recognition in Mexico has to be traceable to a Mexican national standard. So if you're in the US and you're familiar with seeing NIST, for example, that is not going to be acceptable. If you're in China, you cannot use CNAS, and so forth and so on. So that's, in general, what the DGN does. There are three types of standards in Mexico. The first one is the official Mexican standard, which is the NOM. Probably you've heard of that. NOMs are actually mandatory regulations. They're not necessarily standards, but they're actually regulations. Means that everybody that wants to sell that particular product, they have to comply with that standard, no matter what. The second type of standard is actually the Mexican standards called NMX. These are voluntary standards. What that means is a group of manufacturers came together, created a standard, say we want to make sure that everybody's playing in the same level playing field, so we're going to make this standard. Who enforces that? Nobody in particular. But if you're actually working on a government building, for example, you're installing products in government buildings, hotels, housing, federal housing, then the entity in charge of supervising that infrastructure, they're the ones that are going to recommend that you have compliant product to NMX standards. That's the only time. Other than that, it's mainly a selling point for your product. The last standard, and not very common for plumbing products, is actually the reference standards, and that's any other standard that is not covered by either NOM or NMX. This includes international standards and other protocols that might be developed by local entities there to regulate certain aspects of it. Okay, so how are NOM regulations created? That's the main focus here because it's very important to understand. Well, it all starts by technical groups. These technical groups are usually manufacturers, certification bodies, educators, consumers, anybody that's interested in doing anything with that standard or that particular product, they can participate in this committee. The committee then provides a project, which is the to-be standard, to the National Standardization Consultative Committee. And that, like I said before in my previous slide, you have a committee for CONAGUA, COFEPRIS, and CONUE, depending on the type of product that they have, right? So once the committee approves the project, it will go to the reporting ministry's legal team for approval. This is where the bureaucracy starts getting, and that's why making new standards in Mexico takes a very, very long time to do. Legal team will have its time to review and ensure that the proposed project is acceptable. Once the legal team of the ministry actually approves it, it will go to the next level, which is the Ministry of Economy. Their legal team will now review the proposed project. once that's done, and if they find it acceptable, they will publish it on what it's called the Federal Journal, the Official Federal of the Federation, DOF, and it will go for 60-day public review. After 60 days, the comments are received. They are presented to the applicable CCNN. They will review the comments, approve or deny the proposed changes. Then this project will go again to the ministry, to the applicable ministry's legal team, then to the economy legal team, and then if it approved, then the norm becomes official. The norm will actually have a date of implementation, so usually it will be about 6 months or a year, depending on the product being certified. That's how norms are created. Now, the DGN has assigned a code to every entity that creates a standard so that people know who to go to when they have a question. So the way to quickly understand where this standard is coming from is by looking at the middle section right here. If it's a DGN standard, it will have the SFI code. If it's a CONAGUA standard, it will say CONAGUA. If it's from energy, it will have the letters ENERG. And if it's a health standard, it will have the SSA1. These are the most popular for plumbing products at this time. For plumbing, there are currently 6 mandatory standards, plumbing products. And these are NOM 001, and this covers potable water systems, residential installations, and sanitary drainage. This standard actually also has installation guidelines, testing guidelines for the installation, and it refers to a bunch of other NMX standards that are applicable to particular products if you're in the plumbing industry, like piping systems, fittings, materials, you name it. It's a huge standard. It's about a 100-page long standard. The second standard is a NOM 005, which certifies flushometer valves. Third standard is for prefabricated septic tanks. That's NOM 006. NOM 008 is for shower heads. NOM 009 is for water closets, toilets. And NOM 010 is for fill valves and flush valves for use for water closet tanks. Those are the 6 that are right now in effect with Mexico. They're not that many because, in general, the certification program, the conformity assessment program, it's only been for a few years. It started in the early 1990s. So every time that there's a precedent change, and every time that there's a change in government, things go to a halt, and nothing happens for a while until they get going on their process. So it is a very slow process, but there are several new standards that are going to affect plumbing products, and they're being worked on and almost approved, actually. Hopefully by the end of the year, there's going to be quite a few more standards coming up. So this is definitely growing. CONAGUA is very interested in growing their regulations, so they're looking to adopt other standards, flexible connectors, stuff like that of that nature. So all of that is going to be coming in the near future as well. In contrast, NMX standards are not done by ministries. They're done by national standardization bodies. And these are bodies that have been recognized by the Ministry of Economy for the subject matter that they are entitled for. This is this is assigned by the DGN, and the committees, just like for NUM, the technical groups are reporting to the ONN, which is the National Standardization Body in Spanish, and they follow their process to develop this project, which will become an NMX standard. So if you need to do a NMX standard, you have to go to one of those committees to participate in. There are currently 10 recognized ONNs in the country, and there's a list on the Secretary of Economy's website there for that information. Okay, so who enforces it? We've talked about how it's made, but who's in charge of doing this? Well, at this point, enforcement is mainly done by the certification body. The certification body has to be an accredited body, and it has to be a recognized body. 2 things. The certification body will ensure that the product complies with the regulations, that the products meet the spec, that all the installation instructions have the proper wording, it's in Spanish, and that it meets the proper marking requirements. After that, it's the certifications body or the accredited inspection bodies that are responsible for doing the monitoring of the product that's certified. So after the certification is given, depending on the type of certification that the product has, we'll go into a schedule of inspections and product retesting. Product retesting is huge in Mexico. Pretty much almost 100% of the products get tested, depending on the scheme. It's very, very, very heavy testing that's done in Mexico. The last line of defense, as far as the conformity assessment, is actually held at customs. It's the customs agent at the port of entry that is responsible for ensuring that the product complies with the standards. All the certification bodies submit their certifications to a local entity for the government of the Ministry of Economy, where customs agents verify that the product that they're seeing at the port actually appears certified by a recognized certification body. That's how that's done. There is no officials that are verifying the installations on the site. It's all done at point of entry and market, like as we said before. Any issues with this will cause the certificate to be removed from the portal of the Secretary of Economy, Ministry of Economy, and will not allow the product to go into the country. Like I was mentioning briefly before, there is also a monitoring of the performance. Certificates in Mexico can be done for manufacturers, importers, distributors. So whoever is responsible for that has to commit to do inspections periodically and also to have product retesting. It depends on what scheme of certification they choose to and they can comply with in order to determine how many times we're going to go, what kind of products we're going to test, and how many products we're going to be testing. Any issues with the surveillance program, by law, it will suspend the certificate and eventually will cause the certificate to be revoked. Going a little bit further than that, if we look at the federal law metrology, chapter 2, article 112, if I remember correctly, has a list of penalties depending on the type of infraction that is done. If the penalty can range from 20 times the local minimum wage up to 14,000 times the minimum wage per day, depending on the type of issue found. So I urge you to read that. It's actually a fascinating read. It's very detailed. Now, let's talk about a little bit of how we certify the plumbing products. Like I said, the manufacturer has 4 options to their choosing. They can choose for type 1, type 2, type 3, or type 4. And it depends on, and each one varies by length, meaning 1 will last the certificate for 1 year, 2 for 2 years, 3 for 3 years, and 4 is an indefinite amount of time. Every type of certification has a special requirement to comply with. So not everybody can automatically go for type 4. Not everybody can go for type 3. It depends on your situation. It's what you're actually going to comply with. There's many, many guidelines for each one, way more than the time that we have right now to talk about this. But if anybody has any questions, I can definitely talk to you about afterwards. But these are the 4 options that you have right now. In order to certify the product, the certification process actually has 5 stages. You have to first submit an application to your certification body. And with that application, there's a few things that are very critical, actually. The certificate owner must have an RFC, which is the taxpayer's registry number. This is how the equivalent of the IRS makes sure that everybody is doing their share of the game in the country. So they want the certification body to keep registers of that manufacturer's RFC, so that if there's ever an issue, they can come back and track down exactly who's responsible for that certificate of listing. We have to have that. The manufacturer needs to also submit test reports that are not older than 90 days. And they also must submit the tariff codes for the products that are being listed. All of that information gets placed on the certificate of listing, which they will need to get the product across port of entry. So that's the first part. Then it goes to the application review. Here, the certification department will review the material, make sure that everything is in compliance. If there's an inspection that needs to be done, that gets done and gets acceptable. Once that is received and everything is found in compliance, then it goes to the third stage, which is we issue the certificate. Once the certificate is issued, we go into product surveillance. Product surveillance is monitoring, which includes inspections and includes testing. The testing is, like I said, very, very, very heavy. And then at the end, if you continue to demonstrate full compliance with all the regulations, then you're allowed to renew your certificate. That's the cycle of the certification process in Mexico. Okay, to finish up my presentation today, there's a few challenges in the country, and it is a never-ending story for it. One of the things that makes it incredibly difficult is the fact that there's a big issue with socio-political problems. There's a big separation between the super rich and the low, the very poor. And the distribution of resources is always seen as a political aspect. Who gets the resources delivered? Is it does it go to the poor? Does it go to the middle class? Does it go to the upper class? Because of that, there's always going to be tensions in the country. No matter what the government does or the regulating entities, if it goes for development of the infrastructure of a middle class community, the lower classes say we're getting discriminated. If it goes to the other side, then the upper class will complain. So it's a never-ending problem. When we attend CONAGUA meetings, we've encountered several times where there's massive demonstrations at the building, and we had to enter like rock stars covered by securities because people are actually fighting to get into the building to complain. So it is very interesting. Not used to that here in the US, but it is a big problem in Mexico. Also, the infrastructure of water resources is not fully compatible with North America or other countries around the world. Mexico works with extremely low water pressures. We're talking about pressures of about 4 psi, roughly, in the lower end. And then you go to the major cities, and you're talking about 80 psi. So the range of pressures that you're dealing with, it's ginormous. So because of that, many products that are sold in the country are not compatible in Mexico, meaning the country in the United States. And there's a particular push to not allow directly a U.S. Influence because of the relation between the U.S. and Mexico right now. So there's always a push to maintain the concepts within the country and not accept foreign ideals. So that's a big challenge as well. Third is actually the water quality. Like Shirley was mentioning for Indonesia, potable water in Mexico is not what we know as water quality, potable water in Mexico. It's actually considered just for bathing, not for drinking. So there's not that interest in getting products approved for high-risk products. Next is the water resources are not accessible throughout the country due to geographic restrictions. Actually, Mexico does not have a lot of potable water in the country. There are regions that absolutely do not have water, and actually get sent via trucks to the communities to deliver the water once a week for that community. So that's a big issue that CONAGUA is trying to resolve. Because of that, and because of the scarcity of water in the country, CONAGUA is really pushing hard right now to promote the use of water-efficient products. So everything that you're going to be seeing coming up real soon, it's water-efficient products. They call it grado ecológico, which is ecological-grade products. All of that is going to be coming up real soon, and that is definitely the direction that the country is going as far as conformity assessment for plumbing products. So that being said, that's all I have for this presentation. Thank you everybody for spending some time with me here today.
Very interesting, JJ. A lot of information that I didn't even know. It's our neighbors to the south.
It is.
Any questions for Jose?
Thanks, that was very interesting. Yeah, look, I guess coming from the water efficiency background, I'm just curious about what's being done in that space of water efficiency. And I'm partly interested, there's sort of two side reasons. One is that the President of Mexico, alongside with the Prime Minister of Australia, were two of 12 people on the high-level panel on water set up by the United Nations and the World Bank. So that was something where we were cooperating on water efficiency aspects. And also, Mexico is going to be part of our the project committee for our ISO standard on water efficiency labeling. So yeah, I'm curious about what's being done in that space.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, CONAGUA is being very strong and forthcoming on the development of new standards. They are pushing for extremely low flow products. This is going to be enforced via NOM regulations. There are certain product standards, there are NMX standards right now that are being considered to become NOM standards soon. Those standards right now are considered non-mandatory, but they do have the basis for a low flow, low consumption, minimum use product. There is a push also for automatic shut-off systems that regulate the amount of flow per flush on units. This is all coming up. It's going to be a while. There is the discussions, but everything in Mexico takes a little bit of time. But it is being pushed for, and CONAGUA is taking big steps to get there. They just implemented certification bodies, certification committees that are in charge of creating technical groups that are going to oversee and find what the necessities are for this type of product. So this is all going to be coming soon. It is part of the agenda for those committees as well. So it is in the beginning stages though. So I wouldn't expect to see something like that in the next year or two. Everything takes at least 2 years or 3, sometimes a little bit more. But it is definitely happening.
This is Jose's boss who's going to ask him a question, so
I'm
this is going to be
worried.
good.
He knows me.
Thank you, Jose. Excellent job.
Thank you, sir.
Is being accredited by EMA in Mexico is good enough, or you still need to be certified by CONAGUA?
Excellent question. In Mexico, being accredited is not the only thing that you need. You have to be approved or actually recognized by the entity in charge of enforcing the standards that are going to be used in their jurisdiction. So, for example, if you are you're certifying electrical products, this falls under the Ministry of Energy, so you have to be recognized by CONUE. If you're certifying to NOM standards that are under the CONAGUA jurisdiction, you have to be recognized by CONAGUA. So you have to have multiple things in order to get that accreditation, that approval to certify.